Lucky you!
Best 36 holes in golf.
You tuned in to Alternate Shots Podcast,
Arnie's Army.
where we talk about golf,
Marquis Sanders.
poker,
On. James Bond.
horse racing,
I'm all in.
great movies.
Alfred Hitchcock.
We have no script.
And down the stretch they come.
We're glad you joined us.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Whoop, let's start again. Well, Billy, we're back. We're coming back to you with a little different look on the movies and life. What are we going to do today? Who are we going to talk about today?
Look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's all the heroes we can think of that we've come across since childhood. Some of them have turned into icons over time. Some of them have set their own standards, like Superman, for instance, became the first superhero. Now there's 200 million of them. There's James Bond. There's so many great heroes, and the differences between them. I mean, every movie theoretically has a hero of some kind, but some of the characters were heroic enough and popular enough to create ongoing stories, like Superman or Sherlock Holmes or James Bond. Those were, constant heroes that the audience wanted to see them be heroic over and over again in different situations. Those to me are the classic heroes, and I throw Popeye in there too because
Where's Popeye?
Popeye. If you,
I don't see him. Bring him up.
oh, Popeye, here's my buddy Popeye right here.
Can't see him. You got to bring him up to the front, really up front.
Up
He's
here.
got a little pipe in there too. He sort of looks like Marlon Brando in The Godfather with those jaws.
Yeah, he's strong to the finish because he eats his spinach. But,
So,
but Popeye had an arch enemy in Bluto, and Superman had an arch enemy in Lex Luthor, who's been really reinterpreted over time. So has Superman, and Sherlock Holmes had Professor Moriarty, who originally he's the most famous enemy of Sherlock Holmes, but he was really only in one of the stories that Conan Doyle wrote, and he died in it when they both went over the Rhinebeck Falls. But Conan Doyle had to bring Sherlock back because he was so popular, so they found a way to bring him back. But then, it took on a life of its own. In my opinion, one of the greatest fictional characters of all time, because people actually visit his address in London like he really lived there.
yeah,
A lot of people think Sherlock Holmes really lived.
I didn't think of Sherlock Holmes, but in terms of did he save the world? Maybe. Bond or people like that were out there.
Bond and Superman are saving the earth. Yeah.
And then there's is it the person that, Popeye in the cartoon character or always that cartoon and whoever's voice was it? Who was the voice behind Popeye? Do you remember?
I forget his name, and no one has ever been able to imitate him as well as he did that voice. But Popeye was only ever saving olive oil.
Yeah.
He wasn't saving, tidal waves or rescuing people. He was just either saving olive oil or building a bridge or building a ship or whatever. And mostly created to teach kids to eat spinach.
Who was the guy that wanted a cheeseburger? Wimpy?
Wimpy, yeah. He'd gladly pay you Tuesday for a cheeseburger today.
How come Wimpy never had any money?
I think he must have spent it all at the diner.
At the diner?
Right.
Yeah, Wimpy. Yeah, there's got to be side characters. Was Lois Lane a heroine, or was she just a adjunct character? Jimmy Lawrence or the chief?
Yeah, but she was in her own way. She was a heroine because she had all kinds of chutzpah, absolutely no fear, sometimes to the point of stupidity, where she'd get in trouble all the time. But over the years, and as time moved on, and as women became more prominent figures in fictional heroics, Lois Lane's character was developed also. Then you had Wonder Woman. There's a lot of women, even some. I don't know if you remember the series Veronica Mars with Kristen Bell playing a high school heroine, daughter of a detective, and she was a detective herself. So the public loves a hero. The hero then, when the hero becomes part of the culture, then he has to have an arch enemy to become like a real hero. Or they don't always have an arch enemy. You take Jack Reacher now, who's a beloved hero in literature, to the point where now there's movies and TV series and stuff like that. But he's never just against one guy. It's always a different situation.
No,
Superman, for the most part, was always dealing with Lex Luthor problems. Not always, but Lex Luthor was his absolute arch enemy, and his role in the Superman series has been also morphed. But originally, he was Clark Kent's friend in school when they were kids, and Luthor was a brilliant scientist doing some kind of experiment. And it went awry, and then Superboy saved him. But in saving him, Lex Luthor lost all his hair and and then started hating Superboy for the rest of his life. So that's how simple they made this when the characters were originally written back in the early 40s. I would imagine Lex Luthor showed up. Superman showed up in 38 or 39. And then came Spider-Man and Batman and, Captain America and any number of comic book heroes, from the Hulk, but the Marvel one was DC, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. They were DC heroes. Then Stan Lee came along with Marvel, and those heroes were always, they had psychological stuff. Spider-Man was always moody, or the Hulk would lose his temper and turn into the Hulk, or the Fantastic Four had their problems. The Thing was ugly, He brought more of the human psychological side to everything that DC didn't have. Superman didn't have any problems. He was just smart, invulnerable, and probably the most, I'd say, misunderstood part of Superman was his secret identity. Modern Superman, they always tell you it's Clark Kent. Everybody knows Clark Kent and Superman are the same people.
No, but in the old days, nobody knew.
You couldn't know. That was the most guarded secret of all time. Even though all he did was put on a pair of glasses.
And all he needed was a telephone booth.
You recognize me?
Yeah.
Not anymore.
This is off the cape on. But if you go, I watched the original, with Christopher Reeves, not
George. Not related. Reeves, George Reeves with an S at the end, Christopher Reeve, no S. So that was just another one of the coincidences in the world. And to me, Christopher Reeve did a great job with the Superman movies. They got a little campy after the second one, but the first two were really very close to the original.
The comic book.
Yeah, but the original comic book character developed in the comics also. He wasn't always as powerful as he turned out. Originally, he could leap tall buildings in a single bound. That turned into flying somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
He had X-ray vision, heat vision, super breath, super hearing. He could fly. He was invulnerable, super strength. Everything he needed. And there was one theory that his creator created him because his parents were victims of a crime. But his real father, Jor-El, was and his mother Lara on Krypton. They were the ones who warned everybody that Krypton was exploding, and
and that was
they got the Chicken Little approach to that. So,
yeah. But then I remember seeing him when he was a baby, and they put him in that vessel to send to Earth or send off of Krypton, and he had all those crystals in there. So the crystals gave him a lot of things: his personality, his advantage, and it also maybe was the geolocation of where he was going.
One of the powers that in the original comics, they didn't show you how he got that smart, but he had the power of total recall. So he could remember everything from his youth. That's how they explained it in the early comics. And he was wrapped in blankets from Krypton, so they became indestructible as well. And his adopted mother, Martha Kent, unraveled the blankets and then reknitted them into his Superman costume, so it couldn't get burned or ripped or anything like that. It's the way back in the day when they were in the 50s and 60s, when Superman comics were very popular, they had letters to the editor pages, and people would write about the mistake in this comic on this page. His hair's blue, and the next his hair's green, and the next it's blue. And it was like a game because the editor would then explain that. The editor would never admit a mistake. So he'd say, a green plane flew by and the reflection off it came through the window, making his hair look green for a second. That's why it's green in that panel and blue again. So for me, it became a great like exercise to try and find something wrong and catch them at it. And,
It's kind of like what you see now in social media. You post something up,
yeah,
some comments, maybe it's just a positive comment or it's a comment to correct you. And obviously, if you're going to, like the two of us, we like to comment what's correct. We don't like to make stuff up. But it's very similar, and this is what you're talking about in the 50s and the 60s. That's way
right.
before the internet. And
Yeah, it was a way of making it interactive with their readers. So, they called it the DC mailbag or Cape and Cowl comments for the Batman stuff. So yeah, it was cool.
lo and behold, we didn't know the animators were having their fun with all of us by making his hair green on one of those little stretches.
Well, it was just probably a printing error.
Yeah,
That's what I mean. There were like one panel he doesn't have his cape on, and they'll explain that. Very seldom did the editor say you caught us. Very seldom, and that became part of the fun because you'd read the comics. I had a subscription. Me and two neighbor kids. We're 10 years old. We all chipped in 25 cents a month or whatever it was, and we'd get these things in the mail, the newest edition of the Superman comics. So my mother threw out thousands of them, but I probably still have 1,000 lying around here somewhere.
In film, do people like meet John Doe, Gary Cooper? Was he a hero there, or was Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca? Was he a hero? I mean, these are.
That's what I mean. In movies like that, and in all movies, there's a protagonist, usually a protagonist and an antagonist. And in some cases, the protagonist is always looked at as the hero. So
yeah.
I don't know how you define hero. In general, do they have to rescue somebody to be a hero, or do they just have to do the right thing to be a hero? And that's all part of the interpretation of any film or novel. But the heroes that stand the test of time repeat. It's not just John Doe. It would be John Doe or Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Mr. Smith would have 3, 4, 5, 6 more movies, like Nick and Nora Charles in the Thin Men, or Mr. Moto with Peter Lorre, or The Saint with George Sanders playing Simon Templar. They keep going. Jack Reacher in the novels, there's 30 of them.
Or behind me, James Bond.
Or Bond, of course. Bond is the classic of all of them.
Yeah,
Bond is so good they keep changing who plays him because they can't. Except these last morons think they killed him. I've yet to see them kill James Bond.
I'm spending a lot of time on figuring out who's going to be the next Bond, whether it's Aaron Taylor or whatever his name is, or Idris Elba. It's going to be some Brit who's got some muscle on him.
Yeah, and I trust them. They do the best they can. And the 3 that we're showing, Sean Connery, that was it. Hard to follow that act, but Pierce Brosnan was pretty good, and Daniel Craig, I think, was a really good take because he didn't try to be Sean Connery. He tried to be James Bond, and it was a bit of a bit edgier, rougher edges kind of character, less emotional, and James Bond was, aloof. Or when I say James Bond, Sean Connery was aloof.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Craig isn't so aloof about all that. It's not like how fancy he is or his martinis. In one of his movies, shaking his shirt, he's like, "Do I look like I care?" So they did add that extra, which I think was a good idea because the character has to develop. Otherwise, we're just watching repeats.
You got different directors too. I mean, you don't have
different interpretations.
Yeah, but the one common thing about all the James Bond, the character type, is they're all men.
I'm sorry, but James Bond can't be a girl. 007 can't be a girl.
Thank you. 008 can be a girl.
Yeah, but 007, that's James Bond, that's a man, it's only going to be a man.
Gabby says Superman's got to be a man. Got to be a man. Can't be a woman. As you said, let's go create a different superhero. Let's call her
Right.
000 or 008 or something like that, right?
And that's not a new theory. That's how Wonder Woman came about. She was the female equivalent of Superman. And the new Wonder Woman movies are excellent. That's a great character. She plays a great hero in the modern one. What's her name? Gabby Gadot or something like that. Really a good character, and it goes back to the origination of Wonder Woman, where she's the from an island of Amazon women, and they got some magic stuff and magic lassos and some powers. But it's all about fighting the Nazis originally, and her boyfriend Steve, whatever he is, he's an Air Force guy. They did a real good job with the movies, in my opinion. And I'm usually skeptical about transferring from the comics to the movies. So
Well, as you think about other movies, is Indiana Jones a hero? He's like
yeah,
I
yeah, yes,
would
absolutely. And they made what, 4 movies with him, or Star Wars. Those heroes. Star Wars got 3 or 4 or 5 heroes in it, whether it's Luke Skywalker or Han Solo. You know, but they developed that hero and it caught on, so they keep selling it to you over and over again.
well, Princess Leia, and she becomes more of a heroine or hero,
Correct. Yeah.
a hero in the in most recent versions.
And there was always Supergirl too. We shouldn't leave her out. She was Superman's cousin. Linda Danvers was her secret identity, and she survived the explosion of Krypton because Brainiac, Superman's other archenemy, developed a shrinking ray that shrunk the entire city of Argo. Was it Argo? So and stole it before Krypton exploded, and she lived there. So she managed to get to Earth, as did Superman's dog Krypto. So they kept adding on. That's what you do with heroes. You keep adding on to their legacy that way.
In a few weeks, we're going to see the movie Wicked, which features a different side of the Wizard of Oz, before Dorothy, as they say. But the witch that helped Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz was friends with the Wicked Witch. Was it the Wicked Witch of the East or whatever? Whoever is the one that
West-
gone. But that may be, actually a villain more than a hero, obviously. But yeah, there's sometimes a fine line between villains and heroes. In James Bond, there wasn't. There was the bad guy and the good guy, and Batman and Robin and Superman.
Batman was always good. The Joker was always bad. Blofeld was always bad. As far as we know, some of them try to go back and trace the reasons or the development. Have at it if you want, but I don't really care what made Blofeld bad. It was just I knew Bond had to beat him.
Were Abbott and Costello in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein heroes?
Even Lon Chaney, who was the Wolfman, was a little bit of a hero then because he was trying to
Stop.
save everybody, and he ended up taking Dracula down.
Yeah, he was actually a bad guy turned hero.
And speaking of heroines, there's one that we should never leave out, which is Lassie. Lassie was the epitome of heroic. Although Lassie was played by a male, the character was female.
Same could be true of Flipper.
And Flipper. I love Flipper.
Flipper's a great movie. Yeah. Well, Flipper helped the town. The town couldn't get fish. The town survived on the fishermen's proceeds.
And he could chase sharks away. Flipper was great.
Yeah, Flipper was one of my all-time great heroes.
I saw Flipper in the Seaquarium in Florida when I was a kid. And there was another dolphin there they called the Carolina Snowball. It was an albino dolphin. I always remember that.
Who was the hero in The Sound of Music? Was it the father? Was it Julie Andrews?
Julie Andrews.
Manager? Maybe it was the manager.
They all played their part, and the father was definitely heroic, but it was Julie Andrews that drove that movie start to finish, in my opinion. Maria, from the convent to the escaping the Nazis, and that was based on a true story. about the Von Trapp family. So that's like sort of like the Pride of the Yankees was based on Lou Gehrig. But you know how much of it is fictionalized. You have to believe a lot of it's fictionalized, but you know, who's a bigger hero than Lou Gehrig? You know, today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. That is just courage personified, standing there like that, you know, playing through all that, accomplishing what he accomplished. He's a real life hero. You know, we all love Babe Ruth or Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays. You know, they were great players, but Lou Gehrig was more than a player, which is why he got the biopic.
Gently crosses over to golf. I heard a great story in this book called Live and Let Die. It's a brand new book about the Live Tour and the PGA Tour, and it goes into some great stories. One was Bruce Edwards told a story. He caddied for both Greg Norman and Tom Watson, and he talked about these two guys. And we know Tom Watson won 5 Open championships. He had his disappointing finish against Stuart Sink not many years ago. He would have been the oldest.
Yeah.
And he had it coming into 18. If he had just hit a shorter shot from that 9-iron, he'd have won that. But Bruce Edwards,
like 180-yard 8-iron or something like that.
if he caddied for Tom Watson, he hit this perfect drive in one tournament. It might have been the Open, and he gets down to the drive and it's sitting in a divot. And he says to Bruce Edwards, "Look what I do out of this lie." He says, "Check this out. Look what I'm going to make.
Watch this." Yeah.
Watch this." He said, "Positive shot." He says, "Same drive by Greg Norman, miles down the middle," and Greg was a massive long driver straight too. He'd be, and then Greg would say, "Woe is me! I can't believe I got another crappy break."
Right.
Blah 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 blah. But
Yeah, like most of us would. Yeah.
in this tale, Norman, and in this world right now, Norman is the bad guy, and a guy like Tom Watson is the hero. And you see that in their personalities in real life. And if you want to understand the whole deal, I'd recommend reading that book. But back to heroes, there's so many examples. It was Bing Crosby, a hero in The Bells of St. Mary and Going My Way as the priest.
Of course. Yeah. Or Spencer Tracy in Boys Town. And those are based on Spencer Tracy's Boys Town is based on true stories. Most art is based on, you know, film and books are based on some kind of true story because the inspiration has to come from somewhere. That's why, you know, characters like Popeye or Sherlock Holmes or Superman are so incredible because who would have thought of that? I mean, now it seems easy enough, but who would have thought of that? Clearly only 2 or 3 people.
The movie we talked about plenty of times, It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart. You know, it turned out to be the hero, only because he didn't commit suicide and kill himself.
And he stayed and did it, you know, he sacrificed. Heroes have to sacrifice to be heroes.
No, that's a very good point. They have to sacrifice. And you've seen many heroes, including the James Bonds, near death up until he's never died. But
James Bond sacrificed a normal life in order to save the world every time he's needed. He sacrificed, you know, having a wife. His wife was killed early on. He can't have a normal life. He can't just go out and play ping pong and go out with the guys. He's, you know, basically on call every minute by the world. So that's the sacrifice. He had to give up a peaceful, normal life for all of us to save us from stuff we don't know is going on. When Bob Galterio made a 6.5-foot putt on 18 to give us the flight championship, he was my hero. So,
and you don't get to almost hole out in the shootout, which is what you did. I know you wouldn't say it, so I'll say it. If he didn't make that, it would have been a moot point if he pushed his 6.5-footer.
Absolutely, and not only that, when he made a dozen of them over the 2 days. So yeah.
You just keep telling
that kind of heroics is relative to a given situation.
You just keep telling his wife he's the hero. He's the hero. He's the hero. He's gonna punch you.
Yeah.
What other examples do we have of heroes? There's so many examples.
Well, if you can go back to, you know, this is getting far afield, but like King Arthur or Robin Hood or Hercules, you know, there's been heroes throughout history.
Well, Robin Hood has been referred to recently. You know, are you the type that robs
Yeah,
from the rich and gives
but,
to the poor? Yeah.
but there's been, a dozen anyway, Robin Hood movies from Disney's cartoon to Errol Flynn to Kevin Costner. Well, there's been so many Robin Hoods or King Arthurs or Hercules. These are heroes. I guess you could say Samson too, but that the public likes enough that they want more stories about them, more and more and more. With Sherlock Holmes and even the new Sherlock, Benedict Cumberbatch, yeah,
Robert
yeah.
Downey. Yeah.
Well, but yeah, in the movies, but and Sherlock Holmes was written as sort of an arrogant, obnoxious individual, but you tolerated him because he was always right. He was only defeated once and that was by Irene Adler, who was a woman who got the better of him in a Scandal of Bohemia. But otherwise, pretty much, you know, a newer hero like Perry Mason, he's always going to win the case one way or the other. Perry Mason wins the case. He saves everybody that needs saving. And Perry Mason caught on too. So they made TV series, books after books after books by Earl Stanley Gardner. If you go back to TV heroes, you could go to the Lone Ranger. You could go to Matt Dillon or the Rifleman. There were a lot of Western heroes back in old TV. Bonanza, the Cartwright family. Westerns it was easy to have heroes because there were so many bad guys.
Yeah, John Wayne was the hero in many.
Yeah, and many of them. Yeah.
You could argue that Hitchcock may not have thought about this, but in each of his movies, there could be pointed out a hero.
Yeah, and an innocent victim turned hero.
Right.
It was a lot of the Hitchcock themes from North by Northwest or Rear Window. You can go back to the 39 Steps, Foreign Correspondent. These were all heroes that were just normal people who got thrown into situations that were bigger than them that they had to overcome, not only to save themselves but for the benefit of other people. And whether it was to catch a murderer like in Rear Window or to stop a spy ring like in North by Northwest, depending on what Hitchcock had as a MacGuffin and who's the hero in The Birds. There really wasn't one.
That's the one I was thinking about, the hero in The Birds. There really wasn't a defined, come out of there. It kind of was left very, very open.
Yeah, because they didn't defeat the adversary in that movie. It just kind of slipped away from it and left you wondering what's going to happen next. So in Bodega Bay, or is they going to stay there or are they going to move around?
As much as the Psycho movie was a shocker, the left in doubt was The Birds. And I think they didn't interview him quite enough about that. But if he was honest, and maybe when they interviewed him, it was too early for him to tell what he was trying to do there, but he was clearly trying to leave everybody thinking.
Yeah, and Hitchcock loved that. Even in interviews with him, as we've seen and shown, he likes to, confound you a little bit.
Yeah, like that.
When he tells the story about the old lady from Central Casting that he had sitting at the dinner table, no one knew her.
Well, I once gave a dinner party for my wife. Do you know Chasen's restaurant out in Hollywood? He had a back garden in those days. We had a table for 14 people. And I got Central Casting to give me an aristocratic old lady. We had her hair done beautifully, dressed her well, and sat her at the head of the table. And the guests arrived and said, "Who's the old lady?" I said, "I don't know." Oh. I said, "I've never met her before," which was the truth. I hadn't. And the proprietor of the restaurant kept out of the way, and guests continued to arrive, and always the same question: "Who's the old lady?" I said, "I don't know, we're trying to find out." So finally the proprietor came, and I said, "Dave, go and find out who that old lady is sitting up there." And he went and bent over her, and he came back and she said, "She's with Mr. Hitchcock's party." I said, "I've never seen her before in my life." Well, she sat there the whole meal. Drinking martinis, by the way.
Okay. Did she enjoy it?
Apparently, she had to be helped to the car.
We have to try that one. I'll put that into the podcast. We have to try that one. That would be, I mean, next time you have 10 or 12.
Like a birthday party, yeah.
Hey, this has been great, Billy. Any parting thoughts on Heroes while we wrap up?
Just keep them coming. That's what we all want. We want the heroes or the anti-heroes nowadays. They make them a little bit, some of these heroes like, Bruce Willis or Jason Statham sometimes are, they're heroes, but they don't always do good things.
Why are you laughing?
Well, at least we have the laugh to add at the end. That's what happens. Somebody changed my grip, and the next thing you know, I can't do the podcast anymore. I felt like I was in the first row of the first pew at church right during the sermon.
And your brother was poking you.
My brother was making me laugh.